Hey guys, welcome back to Lawrence County High School for our week review here. It is a Friday and you will be having a test over the material in Econ 2 Monday. So we're going to take today to just run through all the stuff real quick and look at all these PowerPoints. So let's get started. We said we're looking at economic theory, and our three gentlemen here, which we will discuss, would be Adam Smith, Karl Marx, and John Maynard Keynes. We open up with Smith saying that he was known as the father of economics. He was really a Scottish philosopher who wrote a couple of books, one called The Moral Theory of Moral Sentiments, and then The Wealth of Nations. He's also known as the father of capitalism, and capitalism, of course, is an economic theory featuring private ownership of the means of production and freedom to earn unlimited wealth and profits. So, how much money can you make in capitalism? As much as you possibly can. There is no limit. So your goal is to go out and earn as much profit as possible in a capitalistic society. Capitalists believe in an idea of laissez-faire economics, which means to leave alone. So basically it's saying that the government should leave economic systems alone for people to interact with each other and trade freely back and forth. And that's what the system, or that's how the system will work best. So economy is better off if the government leaves it alone to operate without interference. Other tenets of Smith here: he believes it's human nature to be self-centered because people act in a way that promotes their own self-interest, and then land, labor, and capital generate wealth. He also believed in the idea of division of labor, which would increase production, much like what we saw with the assembly lines, which started to spring up along the turn of the century in the early 1900s. So, famous quote is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own self-interest, which really leads to this concept of the invisible hand. And to try to break it down real quick, Smith thinks that people are acting in their own best interest. And they're going to look into economic activities which will benefit them and allow them to earn a profit. And that's going to be through producing some good or service that people will purchase. But because they're producing that good and service, everyone benefits. You and I as consumers have a choice of things to buy because Adam Smith said that producers want to make money. Producers don't make these things for us because they're worried about us not having things. They make them because they want to make money, because they're worried about themselves. And everyone benefits from it. So his idea of the invisible hand is simply restating an idea that people will benefit from the transactions caused by capitalists wanting to make money. Competition is good here because lots of people want to get in the game so they can earn money, and the way they get market shares is by lowering the cost of their goods and services, which lowers the cost that you and I pay. So competition also sort of plays off that invisible hand. The government doesn't step in and say your prices are too high, you need to lower them down. Just competition from people wanting to be in the game to earn money lowers the price, as if guided by an invisible hand. So that's all for Smith. Father of economics, father of capitalism. Of course, Marx is going to come at it from a little bit different angle. He's a German philosopher, also known as the father of communism. One of his famous writings is the Communist Manifesto in 1848 with Friedrich Engels. And in this manifesto, he's going to say that the history of all existing society is a history of class struggle, which he will say between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, which is a way to say between the owners, the wealthy people, and the laboring class, or basically the lower class people. So the proletariat would be the workers, the bourgeoisie would be the owning class. The proletariat, like I said, they work for a wage. The bourgeoisie, the ruling class that owns. And here's the thing: the ruling class that owns the means of production. Once again, remember, that's land, labor, capital, and then, of course, they have the entrepreneurship. They own that. The proletariat just work for them for a wage. Also writes Das Kapital, basically saying that value is created by the labor of the workers and that capitalists exploit the workers. And this is one of the key ideas for communists, is that all the workers are being exploited by these capitalists so they can earn money. And they don't get to share equally in all the profit they created through their work, which is what he's going to call surplus value. So the answer here is for all the workers to rise up and to own all the means of production themselves. And actually the way Karl Marx envisions everything is just let the government control everything. It'll be state ownership of all the means of production, and everyone will be given a job, and everyone will do equal work, and everyone will receive equal compensation, and everyone will be happy. So under this communism, get rid of private ownership, collective ownership of the means of productions, equal obligation of all to work, and let the state control things like communication and transportation. And he then went out on some weird ideas, not that this is weird, but that agriculture and industry will sort of come together so there's no distinct line between town and country, and also free public education and an end to child labor, which results in a utopian society with no classes, which means no rich people, no poor people, everyone the same, and eventually government just fades away because after everyone sees how great it is, you won't need government anymore, if you believe that. This is our friend John Maynard Keynes, 1883 to 1964, an English economist who wrote the General Theory of Employment in 1936, basically trying to understand or trying to make sense of the idea of people losing their jobs with the Great Depression. Keynesian Keynesian concepts here. A lack of demand can lead firms to producing fewer goods and services. When there are fewer workers needed, this leads to unemployment, which further slows the economy. It's a snowball effect. If workers lose their jobs, they don't have money to spend, which means they won't buy goods and services, which will cause other people to lose their jobs. Now they don't have money to spend, and so the snowball effect is prominent and not very positive here. He said that the economy will fix itself eventually if you leave it alone, but we don't know how long it'll take, and in the long run we're all dead. So he doesn't think we should suffer through 5 years or 10 years of a depression. He thinks the government should step in and fix it now. Once again, he says that the problem is there is no borrow or spending of money, so the government should borrow money and pump it back into the economy through public spending. And what you do is you invest in infrastructure, which means you hire citizens to work to build roads, bridges, and public buildings. Workers earn a wage which will allow them to purchase more goods and services, like trucks and bass boats, and tennis rackets, and floss, or whatever it is you buy. This is known as demand-side economics. If you increase demand, you solve all problems, because once there's demand there, once demand is there, then producers will hire more workers to fill that demand. Now more people have even more money to spend, which will create even more demand. Then the Great Depression hits in 1929. The stock market crash really sort of ushered it in. 9,000 banks failed, 25% unemployment rate. FDR is elected president in 1932, and he comes up with a plan called the New Deal, which was his plan to solve the Great Depression. He's using John Maynard Keynes' ideas. So it's a series of programs that were created to improve the infrastructure. I said that they're known as the alphabet soup program, so to be clear, there's all these different programs that are known by just the initials, like the WPA, which is Works Progress Administration, or the CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps. So all these little programs exist to put Americans back to work. We looked at the Tennessee Valley Authority, the TVA, which constructed dams throughout the South. It created jobs from people building the dams. It created a recreation area for people to go to if you still had a boat during the Great Depression. Maybe you could just go swim. And it also allowed them to produce cheap hydroelectric power. And there's a lot of places in the South that doesn't even have electricity at this point. So this really helped them to get electricity and to sort of become more modern throughout the South. And the TVA, a very successful program, which is still in operation. CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps, we mentioned they just did a lot of reforestation and land conservation projects. They were known as the Tree Army. 500,000 people working, and one of the good things here, not only did you went away to camp like you were in the military, and if you couldn't read, it would teach you to read. They gave you a pretty small salary, which was $30 a month. They're sending $25 of that back home to your family because you were taken care of. A nice program which built a lot of things that are still in use in not only Eastern Kentucky, but across the United States. But the granddaddy of them all was the WPA, Works Progress Administration. 8 million people worked for the WPA between 35 and 43, built mostly public works jobs, schools, roads, bridges. Also provided work for painters, authors, actors, and musicians. Woody Guthrie there, we mentioned, who wrote This Land Is Your Land. And also created out of this time period was the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which insured people's money in the bank. So if your bank went out of business, you still had your money. The government would replace your money. That's what the FDIC did. It now actually will replace or guarantee your money up to $250,000. Of course, it wasn't that much during this period, but it grew with time. And the last thing we talked about during this section was F.A. Hayek, who was a member of the Austrian School of Economics. Actually, he sort of gets credit as being one of the founders of the Austrian School of Economics. And if you really read what they stand for, you know, libertarians get thrown in with the Austrian School of Economics quite a bit, and they really want sort of the government to stay out of economics, except for maybe to make sure that things are being done legally and lawfully. but the government shouldn't have a big hand in controlling economics. And the libertarian stance is that the government should basically leave you alone to let you live your life as long as you're not infringing on anyone else. And those things sort of get lumped together now, at least in 2020. I don't really know if that's where Hayek was going to be so much of a libertarian back in his day. So he did not think that Keynes's idea of compensatory spending was a good idea. And basically, I guess the thought process is we have a depression because there's a greater overlying theme that people are afraid to spend money because there's been a stock market crash, and this has affected everyone. Where Hayek is going to say that doesn't really happen that way. Things happen economically because of individual choice. Either a person is going to buy something or a person is not going to buy something. There isn't some greater force driven by society that causes people to act a certain way economically. So it's all individual choice with Hayek. Writes a book called The Road to Serfdom, basically saying that socialism and central planning can't work, which would be thumbs down on Karl Marx. Government intervention in markets does more harm than good, which would be thumbs down on John Maynard Keynes. So the only thing he thought the government should do is act to prevent fraud, protect the environment, and provide a safety net for people who actually need some help. Here's a good little video. You might want to pull up and watch this for fun. I'll put a link to it here in the bottom. It's a little music video about Hayek and John Keynes doing a rap battle, which I thought this was really funny 7 years ago. It may not be funny at all now. I mean, it's no Juice WRLD, but watch it and see what you think. Looking at labor unions and Tyler Maynard. So it's an organization of workers formed to improve the wages, working conditions, and benefits of its members. And what we see is labor unions are often battling against management, which would be the owners of the company, to try to provide their workers with better wages or better working conditions. It's collective bargaining because the collective means they all come together as a whole. So maybe this would represent management, this would represent labor, and you send your negotiators in, but they're negotiating, trying to make a deal for all these people. And that's the real beauty of a labor union, is you're negotiating for everyone, and everyone is going to go on strike if they don't get what they want, which has a lot more power than a single person going on strike by themselves. Of course, we know that the strike is a work stoppage. Picket lines are where those strikers will go to stand and protest to let the public know that there's a problem with the employer. And also it serves to block replacement workers from coming across that picket line to do the job that the striking workers are refusing to do. You know, the replacement workers sort of just punch a hole in what it is the strikers are trying to accomplish, because the producer can keep producing if they have replacement workers. So it's in the best interest of the union not to allow replacement workers to cross the picket line. Scabs are the names given to those replacement workers by the unions, and it's just not a very pleasant term. We say there are 14.5 million union workers in the U.S., and that most of those will be found in public sector jobs. Once again, these are jobs paid for with your tax dollars. Policemen, firemen, teachers, everyone in go. Private sector, remember, just when you're working for a company owned by private individuals. We said that education and protective service workers, remember protective services, policemen and firemen, have a higher rate of union workers, and people who are working in things like agriculture, finance, food service, very much lower rate of unionization, and the union workers make quite a bit more than non-union workers per week. New York State has the highest percentage of union workers. Kentucky's somewhere in the middle with 11%, South Carolina 1.6%. Of course, you pay union dues to belong to the union to pay for all the services that unions provide for. They don't have a thing like a strike fund, that if your labor union goes on strike and you can't work, hopefully they can send you a little bit of money so you can at least keep your bills paid up. It won't be a lot of money, but just something. And that's some of the money where your union dues go. Then we last, on this set of notes, talked about the different types of shops. Closed shops means that a company can only hire you if you're in the union. Union shop means a company can hire you, but you're going to be forced to join a union after a period of like 60 or 90 days. Agency shop, which means you can be non-union, but you're still going to pay a union due, which means you may as well go ahead and join the union. And then an open shop is a place that will hire you and you do not have to join the union to work there. There are states with right to work laws, which says that employees may not be forced to join the union in order to be hired by a company. And so different states have different regulations. All the states you see here in blue are known as right to work states, and we will always worry about Kentucky. We just became a right to work state within the last couple of years. Labor unions. We try to get a little more up close to them here. United States labor law We see something get passed during the middle of the Depression called the National Labor Relations Act, or the Wagner Act 1935. It guaranteed workers right to strike, to organize, to use collective bargaining. It also made closed shops legal. Remember that saying that there's some places that will absolutely not hire you unless you are already in the union. And then the Fair Labor Standards Act gets passed in '38, which created that 25-cent an hour minimum wage. And I think on the other slideshow, I tried to do the math for you about how much that would be, and I missed it dreadfully. So it's not a whole lot of money. 25 cents an hour means you're at the most gonna earn $2 a day, and then you can do the math from there. It was not nearly what I said in the last slideshow. I was just seeing if you were paying attention. This also created the 40-hour work week, and we said anytime you work more than 40 hours now, you're making overtime, or time and a half pay, which means your salary times half again of your salary. Taft-Hartley Act was passed by the government in 1947 once they thought that maybe labor unions were becoming too powerful and maybe a little bit corrupt. So it's going to allow the government to step in, and one, they made closed shops illegal. So no longer can you have a place that will only hire you if you're in a union. There are no closed shops now because Taft-Hartley ended that. And it gave states the right to create right-to-work laws, which we see a bunch of states have done. Unions cannot contribute to federal election campaigns, and it also gave the government the power to end a strike for an 80-day cooling off period if it said that that job is essential to the United States. And we use the example here of Ronald Reagan, who fired these air traffic controllers because they had gone on strike and refused to return back to work. And just to clarify, when I watched the other notes, I don't know if you really got this, when I say he fired them all, he fired all of them who remained on strike. You had the option to end the strike and go back to work, and some of them did, but those who remained on the picket lines, they were all fired. And then Reagan used military flight controllers until they could retrain. Last we looked at the AFL-CIO, which is the American Federation of Labor, which used to be its own separate union, and the Congress of Industrial Organizations, and both of those unions merged together in 1955 to create the largest labor union in the United States. But really it's just a giant collective of smaller unions, and I listed these, the UMWA, UAW, and the AFT, and Richard Trump is their president, 10 million members, and once again, all these different unions, that all these different jobs would fall under the AFL-CIO. Excuse me, everything from sheet metal workers, cement masons, stage employees, riders. You know, we didn't talk about it. Professional athletes belong to unions. There are unions for professional football players and unions for baseball players, and they've gone on strike before. We've had strike seasons. So it's not just people who are out doing hard physical labor, even musicians and athletes have labor unions. We wind up our whole discussion looking at something which I find interesting is the group of union members called the Teamsters, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, created in 1803, and we said they were freight carriers, which named after horse-driven carriages, but now it's truck drivers, airline pilots, anything that's moving freight. And we talked about their president, Jimmy Hoffa, who became very powerful and very outspoken, and we find out later on he was very corrupt, linked to organized crime, investigated by the federal government in '67, prosecuted by the Attorney General at the time, Bobby Kennedy, who was a brother to the President John F. Kennedy. He goes to jail for bribery, fraud, and jury tampering, but he's let out of jail in 1971 by Nixon. And then in 1975, Mr. Hoffa disappears and he's never found ever again. And rumor is he was buried here at Giant Stadium. As it turns out, his body is not really there. And so his body was never found. And we don't know what happened to Jimmy Hoffa. And maybe he was on an airplane with D.B. Cooper. Or maybe he's with Elvis. Or who knows what he's doing. That's the end of everything. I hope you study up real, get everything together for the test. It will be Monday. It will be all multiple choice. I'm not going to put an open response on it. It'll probably be about 25 questions. So everything should go well if you study up for this. I guess at this point we're all well aware of the fact that school will end on May 8th, which means we will do one more unit after this one, and it won't be extremely long, maybe 6-7 days. So we're about to wind down. Let's keep our grades up. Make sure that you're taking care of your scheduling, and I will see you on Monday.